So it's a very pleasant winter's day here, not too cold, a little bit of rain, which we need, and a pleasant time. And I have family visiting because it's university break. So my 3 daughters are all home tonight.
Oh, wow.
Very nice. And in-laws as well. So we'll have a lovely family dinner later on and enjoy that.
Looking forward to a great family time.
That's right. So it's a very lovely day for me, and I'm enjoying it so far and looking forward to the rest of it, including, of course, what I hope will be this interesting discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Maybe we can wait for another 3 to 4 minutes. Professor Satya, like
yeah, we can wait another 2 minutes. I think 71 participants have come. So we'll start sharp at 10 because question answer and everything. And morning is there, so people will come little slowly.
So Lotto will join exactly at 10 o'clock when the time is.
But 72 participants have come, that is a big issue. And they will be joining after 10-20 minutes. I think all the participants will come.
And so many of them would be there on the YouTube link also. So the people would be viewing that as well, the YouTube.
Yeah. So we can start now.
Okay.
Because around 90 participants have come. So once we'll start, it will take some time. By that time, people will join.
All right. Shall I just kick off?
I'm just giving some introduction, and I will request Professor Priyanka to coordinate. So after 5-10 minutes, you can start your presentation. I'm just giving some introduction. So good morning to all of you. Am I visible? Yeah. So respected Professor Malcolm Wright, MSA Charitable Trust Chair in Marketing at Massey University, and also Massey University, and area editor in charge of Asia Pacific region of European Journal of Marketing. So, hearty welcome to this webinar. Speaker, faculty colleagues, participants of the workshop across several countries. We have also this time we have got last time when we have done this webinar in Journal of Business Research, we found there are very good participation across the globe. People from other countries also they are interested and they have joined. This time we have got more response. Last time we have got around 300. This time around 500 people have shown interest to participate in this webinar. This shows we are the testimony of interest in this journal, actually, European Journal of Marketing. This is regarded as the Bible of marketing. You know, most of us we refer this journal and one of the oldest journal in marketing. As chairman of the center, it is a pleasure to introduce center, our Center for Marketing in Emerging Economics, and the second webinar in the webinar series, publishing in top journals, lessons from editor. So the major problem is that what we find, what is the major objective of this webinar? So center, as a Center for Marketing in Emerging Economics, we have established in 2012 as a Center of Excellence with a vision of becoming the global center of excellence in generating and imparting knowledge as well as disseminating knowledge in the field of marketing. CME is a lively resource center for scholars, academicians, marketing research practitioners, government functionaries and corporations from around the world who have an interest in emerging economic markets. So celebrating its 9th year, CME has been successfully achieving its objective of continuous education, research and publication, and networking. So our 3 conferences, we have done 3 mega conferences in 2012, 2014 and 17. And in 2012 conference, around 21 countries participated in the conference, and there we have found this center. The idea was that like other developed countries, like USA, Australia, and Latin American countries, American Marketing Association, Academy of Marketing Science, but in India, there is no forum where we can, or some good platform where you can collaborate research among the practitioners, academicians, and industry. So that's why the center was formed. The center is driven with the able guidance from eminent panel of globally renowned academicians and senior industry magnates who constitutes its governing board body and research. And Professor Naresh Malhotra is a very known name in our field of marketing and living legend. He is the chairman of the apex body of the center. Center has conducted 24 workshops, 3 international conferences with more than 1,000 participants from industry and academia. Around 40 papers presented in past CME conferences have been published in internationally acclaimed journals in various special issues. The conference made the arrangement, and the center has published 13 research handbooks and 3 conference proceedings. One of the major objectives of the CME is to advance the understanding of uses and application of marketing research in emerging markets, facilitated collaboration among leading emerging markets research professionals, academicians, industry practitioners, and disseminate knowledge in public domain. This objective of this webinar, the second webinar of research publication series, is in line of center's objective and interest to learn lessons from editors' experience on art of crafting research paper in top quality journal. So there was, although in emerging economic countries, we do a lot of good research, good material is there, but we do not know how to craft research paper so that they can be published in it. So this webinar is basically the major objective is to get some good understanding from straightway from the editors how we can prepare our manuscripts. There are several concerns of the participants. I will read out those things. Before that, I would like to introduce Professor Malcolm, who is now Charitable Trust Chair in Marketing at Massey University. He is experienced in both the corporate and academic world. This is a rare combination, having previously been Managing Director of a well-known commercial property company, head of also school at universities in Australia and New Zealand, Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor of Massey Business School. Professor Malcolm is interested in branding, consumer behavior, and market research. Much of his recent work applies quantitative techniques to practically important marketing problems, such as forecasting innovation and decline, measuring citizen reactions to scientific innovations, evaluating the effect of brand and track information on consumer preferences, and gaining consumer insights through visual reality shopping simulations. These publications have appeared in journals such as Nature Climate Change, the Journal of Academy of Marketing Science, the International Journal of Research in Marketing, Journal of Product Innovation Management, Marketing Letter, European Journal of Marketing, Journal of Business Research, and the Journal of Advertising Research. So Malcolm has also spent 25 years of teaching students about all aspects of marketing. He is an author of multi-edition textbook of consumer behavior applications in marketing and engages with the broader marketing community through media commentary and as the chair of Australian Advisory Board of NBAC, Bass Institute for Marketing Science. I am proposing Professor Malcolm to address some major queries of today's participants. Other things will be taken up after his webinar address. But these are some major concerns like the reputation of European Journal of Marketing in the current scenario, aim and scope of the journal, any important forthcoming special issues which may have interest of the participants. What are the biggest challenges faced by publishing in European Journal of Marketing and how to overcome them? Please provide us some practical tips, general rule of thumb on preparing manuscript, precautions to take before submission, paper structure. What are the major review criteria? The paper will be rejected or accepted. More people are concerned to understand what are the major reasons of rejection. So some people have got desk rejection without understanding that although they have a good material, they have made the paper very good, but that is rejected for some reasons which is shown that the author thinks those are minor things which could have been done. What is the reason of rejection? So this is a very important question. Then after submission, how long it takes, cycle time. Some journals provide statistical data. For example, the paper will be rejected. Some journals take more time. After 2-3 months, they tell that the paper is rejected. Some journals give desk rejection. I am aware that European Journal of Marketing is doing very good terms of desk rejection with such span of time. So I would like to listen the policy of the journal. Second is that what are the differences you have noticed between papers from India and other countries? This is a very important question. Next is that how does the word limit change with the nature of articles such as conceptual, review and empirical studies? Time for submission time from submission to publication in general. Are any prior credentials necessary to enhance the validity of the paper submitted in journals? Please guide regarding best sources for checking plagiarism. This is also another important question, concern about the emerging economic researches. Apart from this, another important question, is there any scope of publishing sectoral papers? In different sectors, people develop some papers like tourism, then sustainability. So whether there is a big scope of publishing those kind of papers in these general marketing journals. So now with this, I would like to request Professor Priyanka to coordinate the workshop and handing over the session to Professor Priyanka.
Thank you, Professor Satya. You gave such a nice description about CME, and very warm welcome to Professor Malcolm once again on behalf of all of us. So as Professor Satya mentioned, just to put a structure during this presentation, we will have Professor Malcolm speak for about 30-35 minutes based on his experiences and also the questions that Professor Satya has shared with him. And I'm sure you will have many more questions to come up while he is discussing. Please use the chat functionality in this Zoom meeting, and once he is done, we will pick up a couple of questions, if those which are still unanswered, and we will direct those questions to Professor Malcolm. So that way we will have a good structure in place for this entire discussion. And now I would request, without wasting time, Professor Malcolm, please start with your presentation. And thank you once again for sharing your insights.
Thank you, Dr. Priyanka, and thank you, Professor Satya, for that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here. And thank you to all the participants as well for giving up some of your valuable time to come and participate in this forum. So I hope you enjoy it. So I have a presentation that I'll go through that will answer some, but not all, of Professor Satya's questions. And I'll try to dwell on areas that are not fully covered a little bit more, but I think it will be very valuable to have the question and answer afterwards. But I will let Dr. Priyanka pick up the questions from the chat and feed them to me rather than me trying to do it, or it may be a bit difficult for me to manage that. So the European Journal of Marketing, you can see the editorial team there, the editor-in-chief, Greg Marshall, and the 3 regional editors, of who I am the 3rd. We also have about 23 associate editors and a very large editorial board and many, many reviewers. Let me just, oh, there we are. We are a well-established journal, over 50 years old, launched in 1967. And I think this next point is very important, a welcoming, broad-based general marketing journal. So we will accept manuscripts from all areas of marketing. We're not trying to specialize in one area, as some very well-regarded journals do, but instead to be a general journal. Now, we also are one of the top quality general journals. So there needs to be a high standard of the contribution of the manuscript to justify publication there. However, unlike some other journals, perhaps, we are explicitly intending to be accessible and welcoming to a broader academic community, and not just servicing, say, a small group from the very, very top research institutions, but instead providing an outlet that is really available to anybody who's doing good work and good science. So we're very excited to engage with India and to try to build the journal in India, and we would love to do our best to service the Indian marketing community as well. So we have a very, very wide diversity in topics, methodologies, and regions represented. We'll take pretty much anything as long as it's of sufficient quality, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, particular quantitative methods, particular topics, as long as they're related to marketing. And as you can see, we have about 100, 120 articles that we publish a year. So you'll see on the next point, a big emphasis on theory. So the overall base of knowledge, yes, implications for practice are important, but for the top general journals, it's really about advancing theory, because theory provides us with reusable knowledge. Whereas if we have work that is atheoretical, it's hard often to say, how will this apply to a new situation? So we're looking for the generalizability of theory, and we're looking for manuscripts that move the theoretical debate forward in some way. So it could be new theory or methods as well. That's important to create that or test that. But also expanding the knowledge of existing theory. And this is where most manuscripts are probably in that area. It's rare to have genuinely new theory. And it's often something that is done by the most senior academics with a long career and a long history of scholarship and contemplation. So most papers are inevitably to some extent incremental, but sometimes they can resolve a long-standing problem, respond to a call for research in a particular area, or do something exciting that gets people to think about something in a new way. And that's what we're really looking for, is something that moves theory forward. So we do need to see that theory connected to implications. And those actionable implications are for both the academic community and the practice community. So as a applied discipline, we would like to see our theory having relevance for our industrial market, for commercial and business operations, or anybody who uses marketing techniques. but also the theory needs to be relevant and helpful for other researchers as well. So the theory needs to be connected to things that other people are interested in so that they can use the results of work published in the European Journal of Marketing to gain fresh insights into their own research and how to go about it. Simple descriptive articles are not what we tend to publish, or things such as, let's take this theory X and apply it in this situation Y. We wouldn't tend to publish that kind of work because there's not necessarily a clear contribution that is advancing something. That's not to say that replication studies are ruled out, not at all, because replications can be important to test boundary conditions, to clear up confusion in some areas, to add evidence, but they need to articulate what the theoretical contribution is. Why is it important to do a replication? And without that, then they won't get very far in the review process. So how are we doing as a journal? We're pleased to see our impact factor continues to rise. So you can see over the last 5 years, it's been continuing to go up. Our Scopus site score is pretty good as well at 4.1. And I think importantly, our Australian Business Deans Council ranking is A star. And there are only a very limited number of journals that have that A star ranking. And of those, there are an even smaller number that are genuinely open and welcoming to a range of contributions from different regions, different methodologies, different areas. And we are one of those very few. So we think we fill a very important role in being open to fresh ideas from places that people are not perhaps expecting to get those fresh ideas from, or places that are not always the top 50 research schools in the US and Europe. So we're very keen to fill that role. We have quite a lot of impact, more than 1 million downloads a year. Yeah, that's pretty good for a journal in marketing. But we also have a very, very high submission rate, over 1,000 submissions per year. Possibly the highest submission rate of any journal in marketing. I don't know that for certain, but it would certainly be right up there. And that makes it tough, of course, as you would expect from a good quality journal, that we get about a 65% desk reject rate and an 11% final acceptance rate. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that a number of submissions are just not quite reaching the standard we're hoping to see. But the other reason is, of course, just the competition from that many submissions. However, we do like to get things into review if we think they have a chance, because we think it's very important to try to get peer feedback into the community for people's research, so that even if you're unsuccessful in the end at the journal, you can get some really useful and helpful comments from reviewers that will give you some good ideas for how to develop and strengthen your research program as you move towards publication, if not at the European Journal of Marketing, then at another journal, or for the design of your next studies. So we see that as a very important part of our role, is to help the community by getting feedback to people's research in a timely manner. This is our process, how it goes. So if you submit through the Scholar One automated system, and the editor-in-chief, Greg, will peruse the paper, he may just reject it straight away because he would say, it's clearly not meeting our expectations, or is not a good fit with the journal. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Or he may communicate back and forth with any queries. He will then assign papers that are not desk rejected to one of the 3 regional editors, and that includes me. So all the papers from India would come to me, unless there was some kind of conflict of interest, in which case they'd go to one of the other regional editors. And my job then is to read the paper and to assign reviewers, and I'll talk more about that reviewer assignment process. The reviewers return this to return the reviews, and I then examine them. Now, if those reviews are pretty clear reject, then I'll just say, look, we don't need to go to an associate editor, and I'll pull a recommendation together for Greg to see that. But hopefully there will still be some really useful comments for the authors, and even in that circumstances. If they're a little bit better than that, then we may go to whoops, I'm sorry, I'll just go back to a associate editor, and the associate editor will then write an overall synthesis review and make a recommendation. That comes back to me. I consider my response to that and then send it on to the editor-in-chief, and you may then get an invitation for revision. I don't think I've ever seen a paper accepted on the first round at any marketing journal, and certainly not at the European Journal of Marketing. It is possible. It could be that all 3 reviewers would come back and all would say accept, or 2 reviewers, depending upon how many we can get, and that the associate editor concurs, and I concur, and Greg concurs, and it could be accepted straight away. In theory, but in practice, I've never seen it. Now you can see we have a lot of quality control steps in here to make sure that papers get a fair hearing, and that it's transparent and objective, and that it's a community assessment by a whole review team. And that creates some time. So it might take a week for assignment to a regional editor initially. And then the regional editor, it may take them a week or sometimes a bit longer, even 2 weeks, to read the paper and assign reviewers, because it's quite a big workload. So I'm handling several papers every week, and it's also sometimes tricky to get the reviewers as well. Especially with COVID, people have been a bit less willing to review. So there can be a bit of a delay at this stage as we go back and forth to find reviewers, and it can take them some time to respond. But we eventually get there. We do prefer to have 3 reviewers, but sometimes if we have difficulty getting reviewers, we may go with 2 reviewers, provided both are high quality and insightful reviews from experts in the field. The reviews have a month. Sometimes they may need a bit of a reminder to finish, so it could take up to 6 weeks. So you can see it can take up to a couple of months to really come back, and then be assigned to the associate editor, who may then also take a couple of weeks to make their decision. So, it'd be fairly easily 3 months under your initial first round review would be a reasonable kind of expectation. Can be a little bit quicker, can be a little bit longer. And then you'd typically have about 3 months to revise the paper if you're given a revision invitation. So you can see from first submission to the submission of a revised paper can take about 6 months, hopefully quicker, depending upon how quickly you revise your paper and how quickly the reviewers come back to us, and the overall workload of the editorial team. At the moment, because of COVID, it's not tending to be quicker, but we hope that will return to normal and we can speed that up a bit. Then usually you would see that first major revision. From there, you may get a rejection, you may get another revision invitation. Some things can go through several rounds of revision, but we prefer not to have too many rounds of mucking about with the paper. Really, it should be moving reasonably quickly towards being accepted or rejected. So after a second round of review, there should at most be minor things to be done. And if it's not improving quickly enough, then we may say, okay, reject decision, because we can't keep using the time of the reviewers to endlessly refine the paper for the authors. So we are looking for pretty quick improvement from that initial review. So tips for success. Know the journal. So read some of our articles and think about the kind of work we publish and how it's written. And then as a result, how and why it is a good fit for your work. If you don't know why it's a good fit for your work, we probably won't know either. And that will tend you towards a tougher review process. Be honest with yourself. Are you presenting a coherent narrative? So does the whole manuscript hold together and make the point really well? Is what you're trying to achieve clear? And this next point is really critical. Are you providing a contribution that clearly adds to or changes knowledge? And this can be incremental, but this is the key. And simple descriptive or purely applied research without a theoretical contribution will not progress at the journal. And then, does the research showcase appropriate technical sophistication? And this may require a little bit of work to understand the latest methods in a particular area. For example, if you're doing something like PLS, are you up to date with common method bias? Or if you're looking at, say, impact on share prices of marketing interventions, are you aware of the criticisms of Tobin's Q as a measure and the suggested responses to that, and so forth? So you just need to make sure that you are demonstrating the sophistication that the international community of scholars expects. But having said that, we would love to see strong ideas. Don't be afraid of bold ideas. We love those papers that talk about things that people haven't overtly talked about, but go, oh, wow, yes, right, that's a really good point. That's important. So it has to be connected to that narrative somehow, but to take a step forward like that, to break some new ground is really good. So if you have papers like that, don't be afraid to send them to us, but do make sure they're very well polished. So let's have a look at some of the reasons why manuscripts fail. One of the biggest ones is it really wasn't ready to be submitted. And this is related to the second point as well, in that the senior authors may not have been sufficiently involved in polishing the manuscript. So maybe too much of the manuscript work has been delegated to junior authors or a PhD or equivalent diploma program students. And they've just gone, oh, well, I've got a task, I've got to get it done. It's more or less ready. I think I've finished, we'll send it off. But it's not finished. It needs a lot of pre-review before it can go to the journal. So if you have senior authors on the manuscript, make sure you get their feedback and make sure it's thoroughly included. Similarly, get some review before you submit from other peers, so you can send it to your colleagues and say, please criticize it and suggest improvements. Does it make sense? Are the ideas coming through clearly? Is it flowing logically? Is the writing right? Does the research seem to be properly designed? Is the sample acceptable? Is the analytical method right? So there's an old maxim, good writing is rewriting. And it's absolutely true of academic work. It just has to be polished and polished and polished. Next, the contribution is unclear or insufficient, and that's that contribution to moving theory forward. This is so important, and it really comes through in two areas, the introduction and the discussion at the end. So in the introduction, you have to motivate the research to show why it is an important problem to study. And so that is a very important aspect of any manuscript, is to make it clear to the reader why it's worth studying. And then at the end, in terms of the contribution, you have to show how your research has made a difference. How has it changed the way people think about theory? And sometimes if it is introducing new theory or is breaking new ground, it might be showing that this is an area that's worth thinking about, and it's helpful to have a look at. And this is where authors often have problems, is getting that introduction and discussion at the end right, the bookends of the paper, so that they can motivate it. This is why it's important to study this. and they can explain the contribution. As a result of our findings, we're looking at things differently, and so should you, and these are the areas why. So that's extremely important. The work is not sufficiently relevant to the journal. We're a marketing journal, so if it's not marketing, we won't be interested, although sometimes there are things on the borderline of marketing and other fields, and you may then be okay. But if it's international entrepreneurship, send it to an international entrepreneurship journal. If it's ITS, send it to an ITS journal. But papers that are a combination of marketing in those areas can come to us, but just be clear about exactly what we're doing. And in terms of relevance, you know, if you're not citing anything that's in the journal, why are you sending it to us? Okay, sometimes, yes, it's a gap. We haven't had papers on this topic and we should have. But often if you're not citing the European Journal of Marketing, and in fact not citing many marketing journals at all, then we'd be saying, why is it relevant? So just have a think about what you're citing. Perhaps in the European Journal of Marketing, but also in marketing generally. That's important to demonstrate that it's relevant to the journal. And then perceived flaws in the literature review, research design, sample, or analysis. So in the literature review, do you have recent work in the last couple of years, the up-to-date stuff in there, or is your literature review old? Have you missed critical papers that are highly cited in the area so that your search through Google Scholar or other library databases has not been sufficient? Is it comprehensive enough, but equally without being too long? And an important concept here is contribution to length ratio. So the literature review needs to be comprehensive enough to support the research, but it should not go on and on and on. So you don't want to just take a literature review chapter out of a PhD and submit it to the European Journal of Marketing because, okay, sure, that's an original synthesis perhaps that's interesting, but is the contribution to length ratio appropriate for a top journal? Sometimes they can be, but you know, most often not. And the other technical aspects of research design, sample and analysis obviously depend upon the particular area in which you're working. And of course, the other thing is if the manuscript is poorly written, you should maybe look at some proofreading, or if you have a number of authors, somebody needs to sit over the top of it and harmonize it to make sure that it flows in a good voice. So never, ever, ever forget, this is perhaps the wrong image for India, sorry. I couldn't find one of Brahman, but reviewers and editors are not omniscient arbiters of the truth. You know, we don't have godlike perception of everything that's going on inside your head. We're just colleagues, right? And we can make mistakes and we can't read your mind. So when you write your manuscript, you have to sell it to us, okay? You have to sell it. And sometimes people worry, well, you know, science should be perfect. It's not perfect. That's not the way it is, but it is self-correcting. That's the great strength of science. And if you look at some of the fantastic work in science that has been done, like Wegener on plate tectonics, or the work on vaccines by, I think it was Semmelweis, they had really tough time getting acceptance by the scientific community because they had difficulty selling it. So even the best work faces this problem. So remember, you can't expect us to know what's inside your head. You have to explain it to us clearly in the manuscript. So that's very important. To select reviewers. So when you're writing your manuscript, think about this stage as well. Who am I going to select as a reviewer? Who will come to mind for me? I'll look at who you have cited, you know, have done recent work in the area. I'll look at what knowledge skills are needed. You know, what is your theory area? What is your method area? What is your context? If I have concerns with the manuscript, I'll look at who can give me another good opinion on those concerns. And of course, who is willing and able. And I always like to try to get a mix of early and late career too. Often early career are really, really good. There's so much energy in a number of our junior colleagues. They can produce fabulous reviews, but of course the late career tends to have from the more developed wisdom. So when you write it, think about who's going to review it. And that will help you to say, are you writing it for those reviewers as well? And if it's a particular area, people like me read widely, we know what's going on. If we look at a particular theory or method or context, we'll have some idea of who's been doing the research in those areas. So we'll search them out and say, look, this is in your area. Could you give us an opinion on it? And if you haven't really thought about who might be reviewing it, you might not have cited them. Well, not everyone has to be cited, but you might have missed seminal work. And that's part of what we're asking of the reviewers is, have they missed the seminal work? So you need to think about those reviewers and think, can you pass their judgment? So these are a selection of Supreme Court judges from India, a very distinguished looking group, I must say. I gave the boss the biggest photo. Yes, it's not a court of law, but it's not a bad thing to think about. If you're in front of people like this, could you justify your arguments? If they ask probing, difficult questions, what would you say? If you had 8,000 words or something to convince them, could you do it? So you need to make sure your arguments can be understood by the reviewers. You can't rely on it being in your head. You've got to get it into paper in a way they can understand it. You have to demonstrate deep scholarship of the field. So that means to really know the literature well, to have your design, sampling, and analytical strategy up to the expected standard, a clear contribution, and persevere. You must persevere. Be willing to deal with difficult review comments, because they're not necessarily trying to drive you away. They're instead saying, these are all my concerns. Well, okay, if you can meet those concerns, you have a sale, right? So I think objection handling is really important. So these are my tips on objection handling. First, respect the objection. Okay, the reviewers are volunteering their time. And you may think your manuscript is very polished and beautiful, and it may be human nature to resent a criticism, especially if you think it's unfounded, but just try to listen and learn from those criticisms. Often as well, even if you think the reviewer is completely wrong, what that may indicate is simply that you have not communicated well enough. So the reason they're wrong is because you didn't get your point across. So the problem is still, how can you communicate better? Also, sometimes the surface objection is not the real objection, as we know as marketers. And from a review point of view, a reviewer may sometimes feel intuitively that there's a section they don't like, that isn't working, that isn't doing its job, that isn't justifying the research, but they may not put their finger on exactly what it is they don't like about it. So they may look around for an explanation and latch on to an objection and give that objection. But actually the real reason is something else. And it's, the real reason is that they just feel it's not working for them, but they can't quite articulate why. So to get through those review comments, my advice is to be genuinely responsive in changing the paper to solve the underlying review concerns. Don't just make a superficial change. Take those comments and internalize them and respect them, and think about that golden opportunity you have to take on board that feedback and improve the paper. So that is the number one key to getting published, is to actually take on board the review concerns and use them to try to genuinely improve the paper. But it doesn't mean you just have to go, yes, sir, no, sir, and be absolutely obedient to the reviewers. No, they're colleagues, right? You can argue with them a bit. So if you think they're wrong, you can push back. But if your whole response is pushing back all the time, you'll be rejected. But if you sort of agree on 8 points and disagree on 2 points, that's probably okay. But again, it's the quality of your argument. Stay positive, remind them what they liked about the paper. And of course, as I say, it's not a bad thing. It's a buying signal, right? They're engaging with the paper. So look for the positive things, but also look to how you can overcome the objections. But you must be honest with yourself about whether the paper or the manuscript is good enough, whether you can solve the problems or not, whether you should maybe go, okay, it's time to do some more research or look for a different journal. So be honest with yourself, and that is always the best thing. So for a contribution, how do you make a contribution? I have a picture here of a 19th century salon in Europe with a discussion. These were intellectual hotbeds in Europe at the time, where people would go to talk about all sorts of things, politics, social aspects, technology, you name it. And this conversational metaphor is, I think, the key to making a contribution. You have to be part of the conversation to make a contribution. So you need to show that you've been listening. That is, you have a good literature review, so you understand what's been said already. And you have to speak the same language. And I don't mean speaking, literally speaking English, but I mean know the particular terms that are used in the area, know the methods that are used, know all of those informal aspects of the research area that are employed to communicate between scholars in it. Speak that language, the language of your research area. Relate your ideas to what has been recently said. Okay, this is all like rules for conversation as well, right? Same as rules for a journal article. And then move the conversation forward by saying something interesting, useful, and backed up by the facts. Okay, so that is how to make a contribution. That would be my advice. So we have some special issues there coming up, which we're asked about. And there's the link there to the calls for papers for the special issues. Just a reminder, we've got a very large readership base. We have an efficient and effective submission process. It will all get processed within reasonable times, and you'll get some feedback. A respected, well-ranked publication on the rise, and yeah, just a huge number of global downloads. So please submit, send us your best work, polish it beforehand, and we'd love to see it. So there's more I could say, but I think I'll revert back to Dr. Priyanka to perhaps guide questions on areas you'd like to know more about in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Malcolm. It was really a very nice and in-depth discussion from your end. And now let us take some of the questions which we have over the chat. One point which Komal has asked, which is also a very common confusion as well in the minds of researchers, especially the young researchers who are new into the field, that what are the criteria that the manuscripts get desk rejected? And I mean, she's saying that many a times, and it's like we all feel that, okay, the work is good. We have found there are some novel insights, or there is still some contribution which we have made. We have written it towards the end as well in the paper. But then, even then, it is desk rejected, and at times we don't get any comments as to why is it rejected.
Yeah.
So what is why it happens, and after that what should be the policy for the researchers?
So the fundamental reason is that there is no realistic chance of success in the review process. That is the reason for desk rejection. So there's no point sending it out to review, because all the reviewers will simply say reject. Now, we err on the side of actually sending out to review perhaps more papers than we should, and we do get quite a number of rejects back from reviewers as well, and that tells us we are being fair to the authors and getting it right. It would be great to have some general comments with the desk rejects, I agree. The issue we have is with 1,000 submissions a year, the workload, and 650 desk rejects, that's a very, very high workload. But in general, the reasons, I was alluding to them before, but the most important reasons from an editor point of view on a desk reject is it's just simply not written well enough to be able to hang together well as a good narrative. So that would be one. And another would be obvious things about the research, like a very small sample or very unrepresentative sample would be another, or very out of date methods. So not saying you have to be absolutely up to the latest method, but if it's you know, a bit too basic on the method, those are all things that the editor might pick out straight away and encourage a desk reject. I think the advice for young scholars is, if you want to publish in top journals, read the top journals. That's the best thing you can do, is actually just read the papers that are in there to give yourself a sense of what they look like and what the standards are. And then secondly, get peer review beforehand. And if you can, try to network so that you can get some feedback or review or just a little bit of advice from more senior scholars who have been more successful in those journals. And those will be the three things that help you.
That's quite interesting and quite insightful. Now I'll take up a very important question which is posted by Avinash. He's mentioning that what constitutes a good theoretical contribution, and always new theory needs to be developed, which definitely it's a difficult job, or it could be an integration of various established theories to develop a theoretical model. What is the expectation?
Absolutely, it can be integration of different theories. It's often a good way to go is to take a theory from one area and apply it to another area where it hasn't been applied, so that then you get some fresh insights from that. So, you know, that's a really good way to go. But I think in terms of, you know, what constitutes a good theoretical contribution, it's something that other scholars in the field will find interesting. So that's the key, really. And that's the danger if you sit at your desk and just think up the ideas yourself and go, well, this is a really strong idea, or even it works in consulting or whatever. That's not enough. It needs to be situated within that conversation from other scholars. And as I say, it can sometimes be quite novel. You know, recently there's been a push into looking at flourishing in consumer behavior, for example. And that was quite novel, the Greek idea of eudaimonia when it first came through. But it was sort of obviously useful because you know, other aspects of ethical consumer behavior and sustainability, you know, they could clearly do with some new theoretical modalities. And this is one that was well developed in ancient times by Aristotle, actually. And brought in to say, well, okay, it can tell us things, and used with some empirical research around it as well. So, you know, that would be a new area. So if you're doing something new, people are still going to say, how well developed is this idea? And how well supported is it? And is it relevant to the conversation we've been having? So think of it as not just what you think is a good idea, but something that other people will find interesting because of the conversations they've been having in the literature.
One more related question, which we always find as a dilemma point, is that are qualitative studies considered, you know, anything lower status than say quantitative studies, or there is a more thrust given to quantitative, and therefore we should be doing more of number crunching and, you know, the complex models and all those kind of things? What is your take on this?
So I see no difference in potential between quantitative and qualitative studies. Where qualitative researchers have to work a little bit harder is to show that the research is robust and generalizable. But you don't have to have quantitative methods to do that. And of course, you know, quantitative methods are more widespread and more fashionable. Sometimes you don't have to work as hard to make the point there. But with qualitative techniques, I'd say, think to yourself, how do you know this knowledge is reliable? So what are the protocols you followed? Are these established protocols in the qualitative community? Can you document them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So follow the best standards in the qualitative community. And then what's your theoretical contribution? So is it advancing theory? Exactly the same question. So the trick there is a qualitative study can be like a quantitative study. It can wind up just being a summary of a particular situation at a particular point in time. And we're not interested in that for qualitative or quantitative. We're interested in something that advances theory. So maybe it tests theory. So if your qualitative research is comparing theories and seeing which one provides the best explanation in an interesting area, or developing new theory, or really providing something that's helpful to others. So that's the key really, is making sure it's reusable knowledge that expands theory. I'm happy to take follow-up questions on that if that's helpful too.
So I got some questions only directed to me in the chat window, so I'm just picking up that as well.
Yeah, okay.
So one more question is like, so we are seeing a lot of thrust on review papers these days. So we are bibliometric and review papers, systematic
Right.
literature review papers. So Kriti is asking that, can we submit review papers to your journal? Does it focus on these kind of literature reviews, or there should be something more additional rather than just the literature review?
You can absolutely submit review papers, because a good literature review is an original contribution to knowledge in that it synthesizes a whole lot of strands of research and makes a theoretical contribution by drawing them together in a novel way that will help other researchers, right? So if you're doing that, that's absolutely fine as a literature review. But in a sense, the literature review is just the method, right? So the question is, what's the objective? So you're saying, can you submit a literature review paper? Yes, just as you can submit a regression paper. But what are you studying? And do you make a theoretical contribution? So it comes down to the same thing. So a good literature review paper requires a lot of scholarship. You really need to know the field very well. But sometimes that can come out of PhDs. But often people will just submit a chapter of their PhD, and no, it needs to be more than that. It needs to be, why is this helpful in creating reusable knowledge? But if you get it right, a literature review paper is enormously helpful to other scholars, because it creates a resource that they can draw on and use. But it's very, very hard to get right because you have to have the depth of understanding to create a conceptual framework around the literature that's really useful. And that's part of the novel contribution, right, is the conceptual framework you create around it. So the short answer is, literature review papers are fine, but please don't just send us a chapter out of your PhD.
That's quite interesting. So just out of curiosity, is there any framework or is there any methodology that you would suggest to us, like which can be used for literature review or those kind of papers? Anything that you can suggest?
Well, there are many different types of reviews. So you can have meta-analytic search procedures, for example. You can have, there are methodologies for quantitative literature reviews as well. There's lots of them. I don't think there's any one way. It just comes back to what is enabling you to make a contribution to knowledge. Now, some of those methods are more suitable to smaller literature reviews that support an ongoing empirical study. So they're a smaller review process to enable something else to be done. I think in terms of a specialist literature review paper, it just comes back to the conceptual strength and the contribution to knowledge. A really good example of how far you can go is Vargo and Lush's work on service dominant logic in the Journal of Marketing. And that took them ages to get published. It's been enormously impactful, but it took them a very, very long time to get through the reviewers. And that, of course, is still a work of synthesis. There isn't really very much original in that paper. It's all based on many other things, going back even to Marx's theory of value in a way, and discussions on from there. But it's been hugely impactful. Now, that was not easy to do, but it shows the scope, that there is no limitation really on the particular method. If you're getting your literature review rejected, it won't be because it's a literature review. It will be because you haven't created a conceptual structure that advances knowledge in a way that other researchers can use.
So, one more question that comes to my mind is that while I'm reading some of these questions is that, so usually we have 2 to 3 reviewers for when the review process happens. And if we get, so for reviewer 1, suppose he is given like positive comments or not so harsh comments, if I put it. And there is reviewer 2 who has actually pinpointed, or he is not okay with some of the things, but reviewer 1 is fine with those kind of things. So if there is a dichotomy or difference of opinion between 2 reviewers' comments, how to resolve that as a writer?
Well, first of all, it's very common. Okay, so it happens a lot. And sometimes that's because the reviewers are looking at different things. One may be looking at theory, one may be looking at method, another may be looking at the specific context of the research. But even if they're looking at the same thing, they may have different views because they're coming from different perspectives. That is the job of the associate editor. We don't expect or require reviewers to agree. In fact, it's often great that they have different perspectives. So the associate editor must do that work of synthesis to bring those points together and decide, what needs to be addressed and what doesn't need to be addressed. And then also both myself and Greg can also chip into that process as well, if there are things that are required, and make comments. We generally don't need to, because the associate editors do a pretty good job. So they may say, focus more on these comments from this reviewer than the other one. And that will be a signal as to where you need to focus. So it's the associate editor who synthesizes the reviews and makes the final decisions on what needs to be done.
Right. And so one last question, and then probably we can close the discussion, is if you can just highlight some of the key areas or some of the thrust areas in which a lot of research is happening in the marketing domain, and EGM is publishing in those areas, that could be a food for thought, like where we can take our research in next couple of years or 5 years.
I would suggest looking a bit ahead, actually, because a research project can take a long time to come to fruition. So from submission to publication can easily be a year, and it can easily have taken you a year before that to conduct the research, and a year before that to think about it. So if you're looking at things that are being published in the journal now, they're things that people were thinking about 3 years ago or more. So the more interesting thing is to look for the weak signals of what are the coming areas that aren't being published yet, and to try to get a sense of what those are. So I would say looking at working paper series. For example, if you're interested in modeling, Marketing Science Institute has a working paper series, conferences as well. But also, I think in whatever area you're working in, work out who the leading researchers are in that area. You don't have to work out all of them, but at least a group of them. Work out what the leading conferences are. Try to get a sense of what they're working on now. Sometimes they'll publish working papers on their university websites or conferences, or you may be able to Google the talks. And so do your research in your particular sub area as to where the world leaders are going. at the moment. And that would be better than just looking at what is being published right now, because it will get you ahead instead of following.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So I think the key to publication is actually to read those journals and what they are publishing, and then get a sense of how they write and the themes that they are getting published in that European Journal of Marketing, and then the methodologies that they use, and then get a hang of it probably. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Markham. It was absolutely delight to listen directly from you, who is managing the top journal, and to get those. I would say these are like cheat sheet kind of a thing that we can prepare when we are writing our own manuscript and trying to submit it to EJM. So, Professor Satya, any last minute thoughts that you may have?
Are you on mute?
You are on mute, Professor Satya. Professor Satya, you are on mute.
So
Yeah.
what I'm telling that when this pandemic will be opening up, maybe we will be inviting you to India, come to India and have some more meaningful collaboration in research and everything. You have done vast experience. Stay in our institute for some time also. So that kind of exchange of collaboration will be initiating in future. And thank you very much for your actually detail, because you have given not only editor's perspective for encouraging the researchers, the secret tips have given very meaningful understanding. And so now we can switch on all of our camera and take a photograph. And thanks Ishan for coordinating this webinar in a very professional way, so that we can do everything very easily and without any hurdle. Yeah. Please switch on your camera so that we can take our photograph.
Hi everyone. I think we have around 120 people right now. So we'll all have a group photograph. Some people are still turning on the cameras. I can see that. Thanks.
Hi Ishan, for me it shows that the host has turned off my camera, so it's not turning on.
Where? Let me just check it.
I'm Anandita, so it shows the host has turned off the camera.
And now you may please start. I think.
Thank you.
Good morning. Can you please give the permission to turn on my camera?
Sure. What's your good name?
Deepak Shah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Ishan. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Are we getting any certificate for participating in this webinar?
No, absolutely. There is no certificate for this.
Okay,
but
sir.
we can send that those who are present. We can send a mass mail that thanks for
Great, sir. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have done with the photo. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we are switching.
And we also have another.
Thank you, sir.
So I hope you all have already registered for it. If not, we'll be sending a registration link for that as well. It's on 25th June from 4 p.m. till 5:30 p.m.
Thank you,
Professor
Ishan.
Markham, once again from all of us and Ram Lucknow fraternity and the participants here. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you very much. It was a great webinar. It was very learned. message given by Malcolm sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your participation. My privilege to be here and to
Thank
share
you.
some thoughts.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
ईशान थोड़ा रुको, हाँ, थोड़ा बात करते हैं। हाँ ईशान